If your blood runs orange and blue, this is the pod for you. You're listening to Orange and Blue Bloods, hosted by EJ Stewart and Tommy Beer. Let's get to it, New York.
It's time to get the pulse of the people. Welcome to Orange and Blue Bloods, a Odyssey original, WFAN original New York Knicks podcast hosted by myself, EJ Stewart, and Tommy Beer. We're coming out of the All-Star break. Still no games until Friday for the Knicks. And as we record this podcast, we decided, hey, it's time to hear what the fans got to say. You know, how many times have you heard me asking the questions to Tommy or Tommy posing questions to myself about what we think about this Knicks team? But what are the fans thinking about where the Knicks are? What do they want to know as we head into the home stretch of this regular season? So, Tommy, we are doing a mailbag. You posted a mailbag post earlier in the week. I posted one today as we recorded this podcast. So we basically compiled some of the best questions that we sent. And we're going to do these further in the future. So don't worry. We'll have more mailbag episodes. But basically compiled the questions, and we'll get through them. We're gonna see what people got said and what we think about it. But happy to have you on as always. And let's rock.
Yeah, let's get it. I wish we had some games to talk about. It seems like they haven't played in forever, but we're recording this Thursday, so we got a game tomorrow. But let's discuss. It's with the All-Star break coming and 22 games left on the schedule, it's like a good to check in with people and see what they're wondering.
Exactly, and of course, again, this is Orange Blue Bloods New York Knicks podcast, Odyssey original, WFN original podcast. You can get wherever you get your podcast, including the free Odyssey app. Make sure you hit the auto download feature and subscribe to the channel so you can get these podcasts every episode we drop. So let's start with Action, the Action Network's Joe Dallaire, who's an NBA writer for the Action Network. He writes, where do you think the Knicks finish in the East? 5 seems to be their ceiling, but I struggle to see them dipping below 8 with their floor. So they'd be, at worst, have a crack at the last 2 playoff spots. Tommy, I'll start with you. Where do you see the Knicks finishing where we stand right now in the standings?
Yeah, I think Joe's on the money there. The current lay of the land at the moment, Knicks a half game ahead of Miami. Knicks in the 6th seed, a half game ahead of Miami, who sit 7th, and 2 games back of the Nets, who sit 5th. And the good news is, they're 3.5 games ahead of the Hawks. Obviously, Atlanta, new head coach in town. We saw over the past few days, Nate McMillan got let go. Sounds like they're targeting Quinn Snyder, but they're going to have an interim in the meantime. Maybe that could spark a bit, get the Hawks kind of up and running and get back on track. It seems like they haven't, or on track. It seems like they haven't been on track all season. If I had to, put money on it, I think the 6th seed is probably the safest bet. I'm not sure if that's Miami at 5 and the Nets at 7 or the Knicks. Right. I think the Knicks believe they have a shot at advancing to 5. And with the new revamped Nets team, sans KD and Kyrie, that's certainly an option. But you're right. I think that the floor, fortunately, is the 8th seed. But obviously, the kind of line of demarcation is securing that 6th seed. That's going to be the motivation for the securing the 5th seed, obviously, and avoiding one of the Bucks, Celtics, or Sixers, be also a goal. But the main motivation here is getting at least that 6th spot.
Yeah, I think that I agree with the assessment. I think that the 5 is their ceiling. I can't see them catching Cleveland at any point. They're about 4.5 games behind them. Knicks will have to go on a crazy tear. The Cleveland Cavaliers playing really well right before the All-Star break. They won 8 of their last 10 games. So I think Cleveland is not happening in terms of catching them in the standings. I think 5, they could definitely catch Brooklyn, only 2 games back there. The Heat are still in play. And while we say, okay, 8th seed, that seems a little unlikely because of the standings. Remember, it's once you get into the play-in, then it's just whoever wins that first game gets the 7th seed, and then whoever wins the second playing game gets the 8th seed. So if they were to play against the Hawks, let's say, in a 1-game situation, could the Hawks beat the Knicks? I mean, we've seen that before, so I wouldn't put it past them. So could the Knicks find themselves playing for their lives in the 8th seed matchup against, either the Wizards or Raptors or Bulls? Certainly. I can't see the Knicks losing their last 2 games in a must-win situation with the way they're playing right now. I would assume they would definitely at least get to 8. If I would put money on it right now, I would say they will get I'm going to say they get the 5th. I really think Brooklyn's going to falter. And it's going to be a race between them and Miami. I'm not sure how much Miami will really value the 5th seed over the 6th seed, to be honest. Like, I think that they're a team that they kind of feel like, look, we just need to be as healthy as possible, playing as good as possible. So if the Knicks really want that 5th seed that badly to play Cleveland as opposed to playing the Sixers or Bucks, which I think that they would, then I think you'll see maybe Miami kind of take their foot off the gas towards the end. I don't think Miami's afraid of Philly. They beat Philly in the playoffs last season, so I don't think that they care whether or not they take Philly or Cleveland. So I'm saying the Knicks get the 5th, but I do think that is their ceiling. I guess I'm a little glass half full in that regard. But I think it's a right assessment there that 5 and 8 are essentially that's their range right now.
I think we'll have a much better idea 1 week from today. Next week, the Knicks play. They host Brooklyn Wednesday, March 1st, and then they play at Miami Friday, March 3rd. After those 2 games, we should have a better feel of. Let me ask you this, EJ: 22 games left. Do you sign up for 11-11? Do you sign up for 13 and 9? Or basically, what do you predict over? What's your feel over these this final stretch of the season?
So if they win 500, they win 11-11. That puts you at what, 44 and 36, right? No, 44 and 38. Doing that math quickly. So
yes.
I think they have to do a little better than that. I think to me, like you probably want to be in between that 46 and 48 win range. I think if you want to secure a top 6 seed here, not that I think. Atlanta, I think, is toast. I don't think you have to worry about them jumping up there to get to that 44 number. But I think could Brooklyn stay ahead of 44? They only have to play essentially 1 game below 500 to do that. Could Miami get to 44? They'd have to only play 2 or 3 games above. I think that both of those are still possible. So I think to me, if they can get to I think 46 is the magic number to me. If they can, so that would be, I guess, 13 wins on the stretch. So if they can go 13 and 9 here, that would probably be the number I'd be looking at.
I'd agree, but I would also note the opponents they beat is also going to matter. As I mentioned, they play the Nets next. They play the Nets next Wednesday. They play the Heat 3 more times over the final month of the season, final 5 weeks of the season here. So those games, I think, essentially, whether you want to view them as playoff games or not, if the Knicks go 3-0 in those games, that's it's going to be difficult for Miami to leapfrog them.
That's true.
Unless the Knicks fall apart in their other games. So those games, but assuming they go 2-1 or 1-2, that's probably going to come down right to the final week of the season.
That's a very good point there. And here's another question here. This is actually looking towards the offseason, which I think is interesting because we are in a playoff race, but I thought it was a fun discussion to have here. At Ron T. Powers via Twitter writes, what are your thoughts of the Knicks making an offer for Brandon Ingram this offseason? He could be the missing piece, just as Rasheed Wallace was for that Pistons team that won in 2004. Brandon Ingram is an interesting player because when you look at kind of how that roster is built in New Orleans, in some ways he's a lot better than this guy I'm about to name, and in some ways he feels like they're RJ Barrett in the sense that like they have these other pieces that you could say, wow, they look like they're a team that if they change things around, they could probably win a championship. Well, the Knicks are saying if you change it around, maybe they could compete for a title or be more of a perennial playoff team. And I keep looking at Ingram. I look at his lack of availability. I look at his kind of like reliance as an isolation player, and I kind of wonder, does he really fit next to Zion and McCollum moving forward and Valanciunas like a long term? Everybody knows how talented he is, but I'm not sure that fit is the best. So he wouldn't surprise me as a guy that gets out there on the market. I don't know if I love his fit on the Knicks though. To me, he's a guy who also I think he can play some too because he's so talented. But I think in some ways he's great as a combo forward, a guy who can play 3-4 and. As we keep saying over and over again, how often will Knicks be willing to play small? Not likely. So I'm married to him playing the 3. We know Brandon Ingram's not necessarily a defender. So I like Brandon Ingram as a player. I think that he's a lot better than RJ Barrett. So if you just inserting him into your lineup, I'm sure your talent profile of your team would improve. But would this put the Knicks over the hump? I would say no.
Agreed. I like Brandon Ingram as a player. Can 5 rebounds, 5 assists, 24-ish points. Not an overly efficient player, but the red flags for me are the injury issues. And just kind of lack of a major step forward. He's been kind of progressing at a solid clip. Some people thought that this might be the year that he kind of took off, established himself as kind of an all NBA, third team guy but he's averaging fewer points than last season, fewer rebounds, and again, he's only appeared in 24 games. The Pelicans have really hit, they've hit the skids. They are trending in the wrong direction. They might not even make the play-in at this point. That's one of the teams that the Lakers feel that they might be able to catch, based on how poorly they played of late. So we'll obviously Zion Williamson had that setback with his hamstring. And then what do you got to give up to get him?
Right.
He's not the Donovan Mitchell type, proven superstar, that really elite talent that you're going to give, because you're not just only going to have to give up RJ, you're going to have to give up probably Grimes or IQ or Obi and multiple first round picks and swaps. And the Pelicans certainly are not. He's on a relatively decent contract, making around $35 million next couple of years, which is, probably a value contract, all things considered.
Yeah, I'd say so.
As he is. But again, yes, and most importantly, as you know, it's just not a great fit. For me, I'd rather devote those assets to someone like OG Anunoby. We'll probably get into some RJ discussion later in this mailbag. But somebody that's more of a defensive-minded kind of 3-and-D wing, I think would fit better alongside, kind of the bookends of Brunson and Randle. I don't think another high volume shooter in that spot, not necessarily Ingram's a fine defender. He's not he's not a terrible defender, but I would prefer somebody that's kind of more defensive orientated to kind of wedge in, play alongside because when you have two high usage rate guys in Brunson and Randle, I don't think bringing in a third guy like Brandon Ingram is ideal.
I agree with that there. Let's get to another question here. Let's go to at Success Only Way via Twitter, who writes, why is Emmanuel Quickly not getting any Sixth Man of the Year consideration? Personally, I feel like Powell missed so many games and Westbrook might be starting again that he should be a top candidate. I've seen some of this kind of being talked about on Twitter as well, that and other places on the internet about Emmanuel Quickly. And I have not seen him anywhere on top Sixth Man of the Year candidate conversations. I actually looked up prior to the show some of the odds right now for the Sixth Man of the Year. And like according to covers.com, he's not even listed. I see Brogdon, Powell, Maxey, who started a bunch of games this year. Mathurin, who's at plus 4,000. Christian Woods at plus 7,000. Like now we're getting to like the crazy numbers and still no Emmanuel Quickly at all. So I think that's an oversight. And I think some of that comes with the lack of emphasis on defense, because I think people will look at, first of all, Emmanuel Quickly's offense has been great for about 2 or 3 months now, but he had a really rough stretch early in the season where he couldn't buy a basket. And that kind of really hurt some of his efficiency numbers. His offensive numbers look fine over the course of the season, and they're up everywhere across the board this season. Maybe the exception of free throws, I think, are down because he hasn't shot free throws as well this year. But otherwise, he's been great across the board offensively. But because some of these other guys have, Malcolm Brogdon's efficiency numbers are great. Maxey's efficiency numbers are great. Though again, I don't know if he should count. He started a lot of games this year. But either way, some of these guys, I think their efficiency numbers are kind of putting them ahead of Quickly. But none of those guys I mentioned, maybe this hasn't Brogdon, could say that they defend like him. And I think Quickly, what he brings to the Knicks and what he brings to the table defensively, I think is being overlooked. So when we talk about Sixth Man of the Year, oftentimes I think people kind of pigeonhole a certain role as a guy who's coming in just scoring. And Quickly's certainly done that. But I think the fact that he's not getting a lot of love has to do also with the fact that they're not valuing his defense.
I am stunned. I looked at this earlier this week and I couldn't, the same as you, I could not believe the odds. DraftKings has a Sixth Man of the Year odds after the All-Star break. New York, for some reason, you can't bet on awards. It's a valid explanation for it. I don't, if someone out there can provide me with one, I'd appreciate it. But I know that's in the bylaws when they let DraftKings and online mobile betting. You can bet NBA, you can bet team futures. Obviously, you can bet games and single game props, but you can't bet MVP, Sixth Man of the Year. For those out there in Jersey or Pennsylvania or other states that are listening, right now on DraftKings, you can get Quickly at plus 20,000 odds to win Sixth Man of the Year. So Brogdon's the big favorite, minus 170. Norm Powell second, plus 350. Maxey, who, as you mentioned, has started 22 games this year, plus 400. Then you got Westbrook plus 850, which is a joke.
Yeah.
And then you get the really long odds. Mathurin plus 4,000, Poole plus 7,000, Wood plus 7,000, Bobby Portis plus 8,000, Malik Monk plus 12,000, and then Emmanuel Quickly plus 20,000. When you look at, again, it's not, the award is Sixth Man of the Year. It's not sixth man who averages the most points or
Right,
guy who
exactly.
averages the most.
Yeah.
We think sometimes, yes, Lou Williams won it and Jordan Clarkson won it, et cetera. And those, are certainly deserving in their own right. But again, it's not the person who scores the most point. That's not what the award's about. It's about the sixth man, all around contributions. So the same way we view MP, obviously offensive, is important, but it's your overall impact on the game. I find it impossible to argue that Quickly isn't at least in the top five.
Right.
Very difficult to argue that he's not in the top three. And I think you can make a very strong case that it's either him or Brogdon. I looked at the plus minus for each of those guys. Emmanuel Quickly has the highest by far. He's the only of only three players in the NBA that has an individual plus minus north of 200. He's plus 201. For context, Maxey is plus 136. Brogdon's plus 87. Norm Powell is minus 104. Jordan Poole minus 71. Keep in mind, Maxey's on a team that's 7 or 8 games better in the standings than that has a higher net rating than the Knicks. Ditto for Malcolm Brogdon, team plays for the team with the best record in the NBA. So when you factor in plus minus, it's easier to have a higher, it's more likely to have a higher plus minus when your team has one of the highest net ratings in the NBA.
Exactly.
So the fact that IQ has the highest net rating on his team and Maxey's nowhere near the top. Brogdon's nowhere near the top. Forget Norman Powell, Bobby Portis, et cetera, plus 28. Jordan Poole, as I mentioned, minus 71. When you look at what each player brings on both sides of the ball, and you look at the advanced metrics, the VORP, the defensive rating, IQ, the positive impact. Again, he distributes the basketball, doesn't turn the ball over, makes 3-pointers, has played relatively well in the clutch at times. There's just a lot to his statistical profile as a whole. I think you could make a very strong argument. Again, Brogdon, you can make a strong case for Brogdon. He's been efficient. He's performed well in his role. He's played well off the bench since the very start of the season. That's an important role for the Celtics, especially when Marcus Smart was sidelined. His numbers went up. Yeah. His production's been solid. Not quite as good a defender as IQ at this stage of his career. But again, in terms of the other guys, Westbrook, I mean, come on. Maxey, again, started 22 games. If Maxey was solely a six-man, I think you could definitely make a strong argument there. But Portis, Wood, and Poole have all had their moments. But again, consistency-wise and production on both ends, IQ, I think, is either 2 or 3 or even 1.
Yeah, I mean, Maxey, I know he's missed. First of all, Maxey's missed a lot of games too. There's that aspect as well. He's had injuries, but Maxey has started more games than he's come off the bench this season. He's played 38 games total. He started 22 games. So I know he'll have, I guess, 22 games left to essentially come off the bench the rest of the way. But to me, he shouldn't be eligible. Like, he started way too many games to be considered, especially when you consider, okay, if we are talking about your point totals, how much you're averaging, he's been getting a lot of minutes. So, because he was starting to start the season. So I don't like that he's even really getting considered. Yeah, it doesn't make sense to me. I'll be honest. It doesn't make sense. Quickly absolutely should be mentioned. I see stuff like this, and it kind of makes me wonder, are these people watching the Knicks really? We can talk about, and look, it's like 30 teams. All right. I'm not going to sit here and say, I'm going to get in my feelings because people aren't watching the Knicks. But it just does feel like, the Sixers are on all the time. Celtics are on all the time. The Clippers, these are teams that are on national TV all the time. So you could just kind of fall into watching these guys play and then look at the numbers and say, they're having a pretty good season. And these teams have good records, so why not put them in? And the Knicks have played on national TV, but not those other teams. I think this is just people not really understanding Quickly's value and having not watched him this season. He's being undervalued. So it's unfortunate. I hope that we keep banging the drum on this case for Emmanuel Quickly, because he absolutely deserves to be a finalist for Sixth Man of the Year.
Yes.
Let's get to go ahead.
They mentioned that, I think it's at the end of the year, there's 3 finalists, right?
Yes.
They announced. So again, if Brogdon for anybody out there that can place a few bucks on it, those odds are crazy, because if Brogdon if he misses a couple weeks with a sprained ankle, or the Knicks go on a winning streak and the Celtics fall to 3rd, and the Knicks are 5th or something, all that stuff gets factored in. So some things could change. IQ could get on a hot streak here and put up some good numbers. So I definitely think that's worth a dart throw at the very least.
I need to get just take a trip somewhere just so I can
Yeah,
place
for real.
that bet real quick.
I'm gonna drive to Hoboken, place the bet, and drive back.
Yeah, exactly. So, okay, we got another question here. This one's from a person that some people may be familiar with here. CP the franchise. Shout out to CP, head of Knicks Fan TV. Shout out to me, also hosted on WFEN last week with Evan Roberts filling in for Carton.
Credit to CP. He's a great dude. Casey's the man. But I want to know when EJ is getting his afternoon drive slot. I want to know when you getting in there, EJ, because we need to see you. We need to see you on that primetime slot, baby.
Hey, listen, put in a tweet or call to Spike Eskin and let them know that they got to hear from EJ Stewart. Just saying, let them know. But shout out to, of course, Spike Eskin. Shout out to CP. He tweeted at us. So who is your X factor to close out the season strong as the Knicks head into the postseason? There are a lot of options.
Yeah.
And I think that the answer for me, I think, is a lot simpler than I think people will think, because people are going to run to Mitchell Robinson. People are going to run to newly acquired Josh Hart. I still think the X factor, honestly, is RJ Barrett. Like, to me, like if the Knicks, I think people would look at Knicks ceiling as making the second round of the playoffs. Like, if they make second round players, say, wow, that is a great accomplishment.
Definitely.
I think if they're able to do that, RJ Barrett has to have a really good stretch here. I think he's going to have play the best ball of his career in the playoffs. And his last time in the playoffs 2 years ago, he was just a pup. It didn't play so great. He's been struggling mightily this season. But we know that these teams, when you get to the postseason, they're going to be so keyed in, and their defensive keys are going to be locked in on how to guard Brunson and Randle. And I'm not saying those guys won't perform, but to think that they will absolutely perform the way they have all season, you can't assume that. You can't assume that with the way these guys are going to be defended. So it's going to be up to someone else to step up.
We saw how well Randle played during his All-NBA season in 2021, and then we saw what happened in the playoffs. It was night and day when the Hawks are running two guys, and at that point, Randle had to pass to Elfrid Payton. Now it's you obviously got Jalen Brunson, so those guys will help each other. But yes, don't be fooled. Whoever the Knicks play, should they advance into a series, get one of those top 6 seeds or win the 7-8 games. Yep. Brunson's going to see a ton of double teams. Randle's going to see a ton of double teams. And you're 100% right. As far as the rest of the regular season goes, heading into the playoffs, I agree with you. I think we kind of know what Mitch brings to the table. We saw that over the first 50 games of the season or so. I looked at the numbers earlier this week. The Knicks were 11th in defensive efficiency in the, I think it was 49 games that Mitchell Robinson played. They were 24th in the league in the 14 games that he missed prior to the All-Star break. So, obviously his impact defensively is going to be huge. We've got to certainly have a sense of what Josh Hart is bringing to the table. I think it'd be foolish to expect him to live up to the high bar that he set over these first 3 games. He's not going to shoot 60% from 3-point territory. He is going to defend and rebound and all that extra stuff. And he's going to contribute to winning, certainly. But I don't know if he can, again, match what the early production. I agree with you with RJ Barrett, but I'll take it a little bit of a different angle on it. Is I don't necessarily need him to score more points. In fact, I'd like to see him. I don't mind if his scoring average dips, if he takes less shots. At this point, now that we have 50 plus 55 games worth of, almost 60 games, actually, there's 22 games left. We have 60 games of data here. RJ Barrett should not be taking 16, 17 shots a night, which he has been averaging. Those shots should be allocated towards, obviously, Randle and Brunson. I'm comfortable with where they're at. RJ shots, that slice of the offensive pie should be divvied up. A few more shots to Quentin Grimes, a few more shots to Emmanuel Quickly, a few more shots to Josh Hart. So we'll see how that plays out going forward. What I want to see from Barrett is him to come back and say, okay, I know my offense is struggling, and I have confidence in myself. I'm going to shoot open threes because they need him to knock down open threes when they're there.
Right.
Don't pass up open shots. Any coach will tell you that. I want to see RJ come back and be like, listen, I'm going to play the best defense I have in my career over these next 5 weeks. That's going to be my focus. We have plenty of offensive firepower on this team. I'm going to earn my minutes by taking charges, by playing passing lanes, by being a solid help defender, by crashing into screens, not dying on screens. That's what I want to see from RJ Barrett. The shots will come and go. Sometimes you guys just have off seasons or whatever. And I'm confident in his long range trajectory as a creator. Especially, I'd like to see him drive the basket a little bit more. But again, focus, just him focused defensively is what I really hope to see from Barrett over these next few weeks.
Yeah, I'm surprised that we both went in the Barrett direction, but I think that's a good point that he's going to have to step it up defensively, especially. And I think that leads us to our next question very, very smoothly here. And this is someone who's been asking me questions my entire life. And here he gets to ask the first question to Tommy Beer. This is at Henry Stewart Sr., so that is my dad. So shout out to my dad who always supports me and supports all the stuff we're doing. So he tweets at us, should Josh Hart start? And if he starts, who does he replace, RJ Barrett or Quentin Grimes? I'll pose this question to you since, again, I've answered questions from my dad for years. So I'll give you the first crack at this one. Should Josh Hart enter the starting lineup?
I'm gonna say no. I think certainly the Knicks bench unit has been really productive since basically the second Josh Hart arrived. IQ, Hartenstein, Obi, those guys have already developed a solid chemistry. Their bench production has been incredible. The Knicks are 3-0 since in the 3 games Josh Hart played. And then you get to the other side of the ball. How would RJ Barrett handle a demotion from the starting lineup? He already had, his confidence has to be, I don't want to say shattered, but he limped into the All-Star break, let's say, and his confidence didn't really seem to be soaring at that point, as you can tell by shooting percentage. The shots were not only missing, they were way off. A lot of his 3-point attempts. Quentin Grimes, I'm leaving on the floor as a starter. Again, he's kind of a really good fit alongside Brunson and Randle. And to our earlier point, the Knicks are playing as well as they have. 1-4-5 going to the All-Star break, 6 games above 500. With Grimes not playing well offensively, there's obviously a lot more untapped. We saw it on Friday night in that rookie-sophomore game. And so you have Grimes and RJ Barrett basically being inefficient offensively. That kind of, if those two guys can get on the same page, that unlocks a whole nother dimension for the Knicks here. But yes, looking at the big picture, I leave Hart as this with that second unit on the bench. But more importantly, I think is going to be a part of the closing 5 more often than not.
Yeah, I would leave Hart on the bench as well. I think that I know Quentin Grimes hasn't shot the ball as well late, and Josh Hart has been he's been shooting the crap out of the basketball recently. So I know. So you say, "Oh, I need shooting." Well, Hart's been shooting better than Grimes. I think that those numbers will even out to kind of go back to the norm, and you'll see Grimes hit those shots. So I still think Grimes provides us floor spacing that you'd want with that starting unit. So I'd keep him in there. And one of the things about Barrett, as you kind of mentioned, like Hart has been doing that dirty work stuff, running after loose balls, playing defense, those things that you need from your bench players. Right now, RJ is essentially a high volume, low efficiency scorer. Am I clamoring to have that guy on the bench right now? Like, I don't know. I think I prefer him with the other better players, and right. I could live with whatever offense he gives me as opposed to saying, okay, I need him to carry the bench unit, something that, quite frankly, he's been asked to do playing in that second unit in that second quarter, and he hasn't really done that great doing that this year. I've been begging Tibbs. He's credit to Tibbs. He's made a lot of the adjustments I've asked for. The last one I've really asked for was to put Brunson or Randle in that spot playing with those backups as opposed to RJ. I don't want RJ now living with that second unit. I think that he needs for his confidence. I think for the other players around him, I think he's better suited playing with the starters. So I would stick with Hart on the bench. But you're right. I think that he will be a major option to close games. His basketball IQ, his toughness, his defense, all things you want. We have these close, tight playoff atmosphere kind of games the Knicks will be having down the stretch here.
Thanks, Dad.
Yes, thanks, Dad. So let's get to the next question. This is from another familiar guy to me, WFAN's Anthony Gallo, who does digital stuff for WFAN. So shout out to Gallo. He tweeted. He actually posted it via Instagram. What happens to the rotation once Mitchell Robinson returns to the lineup? So Mitchell Robinson is expected to be back, maybe this next game that they have against Washington on Friday, if not, later than that. But we've been playing this 9-man rotation essentially without him. It's included Jericho Sims in there. Josh Hart came in, so that took Deuce McBride out of the rotation for now. I would anticipate that Jericho Sims goes to the bench and permanently, for lack of a better term, and he then becomes quote unquote situational, as Tibbs likes to say. and then Mitchell Robinson goes into the starting lineup. I know it's kind of weird because Sims is starting, so you go from starter to situational, but Tibbs likes Hartenstein come off the bench. I think he's made the right call with that. So I'd anticipate that's the move. But I do want to say this real quick about this Mitchell Robinson return, and Jericho Sims in particular. He will go back to being situational, but he has to be ready come playoff time, because when you look at the teams that they could be playing against, and I'm looking at two particular teams, the Bucks and the Sixers, I would deeply expect both Hartenstein and Mitchell Robinson to get into a lot of foul trouble in those series. Those guys could be guarding Embiid. Those guys could be guarding Giannis Antetokounmpo. I think there's a great chance that Sims' situational thing actually ends up actually being true. He actually is situational. I think there will be times where maybe those guys get called for a lot of fouls. We know that the officiating gets much tighter in the postseason. So he has to stay ready, even if he doesn't play during these last month and a half of the season. So I'm going to say that Sims goes out. They stick to 9 men, but he's got to be ready when they get to the playoffs if they got to play against those two teams in particular.
100%. And even, Embiid, you don't want to send to the free throw line, but I could see him bringing in Sims just to foul Giannis a couple times, disrupt his, if he starts getting going, and just send him to the free throw line, use those 6 fouls that Sims brings to the table, or hack a Simmons if they play the Nets, something along those lines.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, so I totally agree. I think Sims will be out of the rotation. I think Tibbs sticks with the 9 men, and Sims will be out of the rotation. I think I could see, let's say Mitch Rob is cleared to play Friday. Maybe he plays 12 minutes, or 15 minutes, and Sims plays 10, and Hart plays his usual 24, 25 off the bench. But I think once Mitchell Robinson is back up to close to 100% as he's going to get, you're going to see kind of that 24, 48-minute split at center. And again, shout out to Hartenstein, who played incredibly well. With Mitchell Robinson going down, he stepped in and stepped up big time as he took on a bigger slice of the offense. But yes, going forward, I think Sims is basically an insurance policy that could be broken out, and in case of emergency, as certainly if they play one of those teams with those dominant bigs, could happen sooner rather than later. So everything we've seen from him is, and fortunately he's not like not a shooter, or Fournier had trouble getting yanked in and out of the lineup. Sims can come in and use his physicality and athleticism, and it shouldn't harm him too much.
Stay ready, Jericho. Stay ready. You definitely could be used when you get to the postseason. Okay, let's get to another question here. At Top Shot Yoda tweets, what do you think RJ's ceiling is? Is it crazy to think it could be Jaylen Brown? And what parts of his game could he unlock to get there? So I'll give it to you first on that one, Tommy. What do you see RJ's ceiling in? If it is fairly high, what does he have to do to get to that point?
Yeah, I would say Jaylen Brown's probably too high. You're talking, Jaylen Brown's a consistent all-star at this stage of the game. Mm-hmm. He's only a few years older than Barrett. I think obviously the key with RJ is, on the offensive side of the ball is to become more efficient. Again, over the last 2 seasons, he's one of only 2 players to average more than 16 field goals per game and have an effective field goal percentage below 48%. He's been one of the least efficient shooters, high volume shooters in the NBA over the past 3 years, and basically since he entered the league. And again, part of that is as a 19-year-old, 20-year-old kid, but the more concerning data is of late, of these last 2 years in particular. On the flip side of the coin, we saw the second half of last season, the final, basically 7 weeks of the year after the All-Star break, averaged close to 24, 5, and 5, shooting above 40% from 3. We just have these wild swings where RJ will look like Jaylen Brown one night and then look like, an aging Evan Fournier for 3 weeks in a row. So, and especially defensively, those are things, those are kind of effort plays. If you're looking to buy, if you're looking to look at the bright side of RJ, professionalism, he's going to come, he's going to work hard. He's always said and done the right things. As a teenager, drafted to the Knicks with a number 3 pick, a lot of pressure, never let that get to him. Has approached the game the right way, never made headlines for the wrong reasons off the floor, which isn't easy to do in New York. So there's a lot to like there in terms of the character and the kid, but we need to see it translate onto the floor.
Yeah, I think when it comes to RJ's ceiling, I would probably place it somewhere along the lines, because I think the best way to think about it is, what is he on a championship team or a championship caliber team even? So I would say earlier this year when we started this podcast, I said I think he could be a number 2. I'm leaning more towards probably a number 3, which isn't terrible. I mean, Andrew Wiggins was a number 3 on the championship team. He went the All-Star game last year and had a great season. So I think that's probably closer to his ceiling. There's maybe with the caveat, if your number one is Giannis, could be number two, maybe. I think to me though, in terms of him getting to that ceiling, and I talked about it, I think on one of the last podcasts we recorded, I think RJ needs to get in better shape. Like I'm going to stay on that tune. I'm not saying that he's out of shape. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying the physical conditioning needed to be the two-way monster that we think RJ has shown the capability to be. When I look at those guys, I look at their conditioning, and I mentioned Jaylen Brown when I last had this conversation. Jaylen Brown, Jimmy Butler, guys of that nature. Those guys can play hard every single possession. Those guys don't take possessions off. Those guys, if you watch them play, they don't ever look tired. It's incredible. And when I watch RJ play sometimes, especially defensively, it's not just looks like he doesn't have his legs. And I think that comes from continuing to mature in his body. I think that comes from overall improving his conditioning. So I would say this offseason, next few off seasons, and I'm hoping Tibbs does this, as I said on one of our last shows, he needs to be challenged. He needs to come in the best physical conditioning of his life. He's entering the prime of his career. So that would be my challenge to RJ. I think that's what would get him. There are things about his offensive game that he can improve. I think that he kind of abandoned the mid-range jump shot. He actually got pretty good at that during his second year. I'd like to see him get back to hitting that mid-range jumper. I think that there's certainly some moves maybe he could even improve in the post, considering he gets a lot of mismatches. I think that he should be able to punish smaller guards even more than he does. But I think the first part is come in next season in the best shape of your life, and then we can kind of figure out the actual parts of your game that we need to fix. I think that there's stuff there we've seen. He's still a 22-year-old averaging 19 points in the NBA. So it's not like he's somebody that's some bum. He has a decent platform here. I just need him to see what is that. What do you look like if you're in the best shape of your life? That's what I want to ask for RJ Barrett. So that'd be my question to him.
Yeah, I think the thing you like about RJ is his relatively high floor. He's not gonna.
Exactly.
Becomes a little more efficient. He's going to be, he's going to do enough to contribute to winning basketball. You hope.
Yeah, exactly. And now here's another question on RJ. This from TV critic and film critic for Rolling Stone, Adam Siepenwall, who tweets, "Do you think the rest of the league recognizes that RJ is kind of bad at most things on a basketball court, or at least that when his shot is falling off, he's really bad? Or do you think he'd have real trade value this summer?" I'm not sure about all those stuff about him being so terrible, but the part of the question I liked about was the trade value aspect for RJ Barrett, and would he have a lot of value? I think he still does. I think that because he's young, again, he's 22 years old. I think he'll turn 23 in June. He has a lot of these compiler stats that when you talk about what he's done throughout his career, a lot of guys his age have not done that. I think he has a pedigree that I think a lot of teams will respect. And look, we'll see what happens in the playoffs, but I think that Knicks will be able to sell the team. Hey, this is a guy who was a clear third option on a team that did X in the regular season and did X in the playoffs. Just like they could sell in the second season. He was the second best player on a team that got the fourth seed. I think there are certain things about RJ Barrett's career, what he's accomplished, that I don't think he'd have no value. Do I think that he could be the centerpiece for a trade that gets you a top 10 player? No. But could he be a centerpiece for a trade that gets you a top 30 player? Yeah, I think he could. You probably throw in a couple of picks to include there, but I think that his contract isn't terrible. He's not signed some crazy super max deal. He has a reasonable contract. He's still really young, and he has all of the makings of a guy who wants to be great. So I think that the right team that is offloading a star that is not winning somewhere could absolutely say, give us RJ and give us some draft capital and we'll talk. So I think his trade value is still pretty decent, but what do you think?
Yeah, I think, yes, I think he does maintain trade value. Again, you mentioned the counting stats. One of the reasons Knicks fans were so high on him coming into this season was his production in those counting stats. He's one of only five players in NBA history with more than 3,000 points, 1,000 rebounds, 5,000 assists, and 200 3-pointers before turning 22. The other four players in this club, LeBron, Doncic, KD, and Kobe Bryant. So in terms of, statistical production, early in his career, RJ's right near the very top. But again, you talk about then on the flip side of the coin, you talk about the inefficiency. There are 49 players averaging at least 16 shots per game this season. Barrett is one of only 2 shooting below 45% from the floor, below 35% from downtown, and below 75% from the free throw line. So when you have a guy with the usage rate that high, who takes that usage rate is the number of possessions that end in either a field goal attempt or a turnover. And again, Barrett's near in the top, I think 75% in the league in terms of usage rate. When you have a guy that's that high, when you combine that high usage rate with that low efficiency, that's how you hurt your team. And the numbers reflect this. Last let me see, I have the data written down here. Last 12 games before the All-Star break, the Knicks were outscored by 83 points with Barrett on the floor. So that's a minus 83, plus minus in contrast. In that same stretch of games, Emmanuel Quickley was plus 42. Kind of circling back to our other conversations. So when you factor in, and again, RJ spent a lot of that time on the floor alongside Randle and Brunson. So in terms of winning basketball, Barrett's not going to be everybody's cup of tea. But again, you factor in the age, the potential ceiling there. All it takes is one GM to believe we can unlock. We've seen flashes again. We saw the second half of last season. A guy that was 22 years old, 21 and a half years old, averaging 24, 5 and 5 for a solid 6-week stretch, for a 20-game stretch. Those guys don't come along very often. So I think, in the rights, again, for a rebuilding team, for a team, potentially that, feels that, he would slot in perfectly as like kind of the third banana, then I think their teams would be interested. But I think his value has decreased, in the past 6 months. So that's obviously of concern. We'll see how he closes out the season. We'll see how he performs if and when the Knicks advance to the playoffs, and all those things will factor into his value, in July of 2023. And the other thing to keep in mind here is why I think it's a very relevant question is when Josh Hart, when he makes his decision whether he's going to be a long-term piece of the Knicks going forward, that could further the talks and make RJ even more. I don't want to say the Knicks. Certainly, the Knicks aren't going to give him away. He's the player they drafted. They committed to him with a long-term contract. A few months ago, he's certainly part of their plans going forward. But the arrival of Hart it makes it at least more feasible for them to potentially part ways with Barrett.
Yeah, it will be definitely an interesting thing to follow. It feels like when you look at the team, and I'll admit Tommy was maybe the first person on this as a team developed this season. You looked at the picture and said, all right, there's a guy here who maybe doesn't fit, and the Knicks are building towards something that's good. It feels like it's Barrett. And I'm as big a Barrett fan as anybody, but I think it's undeniable to see it that way right now. I don't know who this is, so forgive me. Someone posted it on Twitter. Shout out to them who did it. Last year, after Julius Randle signed his contract and had that miserable season last season, it was Clyde Frazier, I think, who came out and was like, Julius is going to have a bounce back year. He needs to understand what it takes to be a leader, what it takes, the pressure that comes with that contract, and next year he'll come in the right shape and the right mind, and he'll play great. And he's been outstanding. I'm hoping Clyde can do the same thing for RJ Barrett. At the end of this season, I know a couple weeks ago he said that he was the worst defender on the team. And apparently that had got back to RJ. I think it was Ian Bailey who mentioned that RJ got wind of that and that he's aware. Well, whether he liked it or not, I can't imagine he liked it. But that Knicks as a whole were aware. I'm hoping that this kind of first rough season we see from RJ post contract is maybe what we saw from Julius last season. A couple more questions before we get out of here. So let's get to all things Knicks at JTC9181 who tweets us. Why hasn't Obi ever been given a fair chance to start and be the star aside from Randle? It seems like the Knicks, besides Tibbs, knows this kid's ceiling is insane and has shown insane promise when given the chance to start. He's a team first kid, a New York kid. What gives? I think what gives is, unfortunately, there is a positional and roster makeup that is a conflict. Julius Randle, we could say what you want about him. I mean, the guy's a 2-time All-Star, twice in 3 years. He's a durable, reliable, and for the most part, really good player. He did not play well last season, but for 2 out of the last 3 seasons, he's played exceptional basketball. In order to unlock anything out of Obi Toppin, it would require playing those guys more minutes together. I think both of us agree that they should do that more, but this coach and the way they play, they require a rim protector to be out there at all times. So Obi's defense doesn't allow him to play with Randle. It's one of those things where I feel bad for Obi. And look, if it was up to me, I would have traded Randle this offseason, and Obi would have been the starting power forward for the Knicks this season. And who knows what kind of pressure Knicks would have got. But I think, in fairness, it's hard to say that would have been the right decision given how Randle's played and what the Knicks are doing right now. So I don't know. I don't want to say he's gotten a not a fair chance. I don't know if fair chance is a fair word to use. I think it's just a bad circumstance. I just think the odds haven't been necessarily in his favor. And because he's playing behind a guy who he was drafted to replace, that guy took 3-4 steps of development that we didn't foresee happening. And that kind of ruined his chance to be the star of the Knicks, the star power forward. And this is kind of where we're at.
Yeah, listen, he got it's wrong place, wrong time for Obi Toppin. He got drafted behind a player who we thought was, and the front office obviously thought he was pretty good, but not great, because they drafted a player at his position with the 8th overall pick in the draft, and we're chomping at the bit to do so. And then that player has essentially, since Obi arrived with his new team, that player has been a perennial all-star, making the all-star team 2 out of 3 years. And the fit with the head coach. If Obi gets drafted by D'Antoni's Knicks, instead of Gallo, or one of those, and you get a up-tempo team that's going to push the pace and fly up and down the floor, and defenses, if you feel like playing defense, that's cool. We're going to kind of keep it together, basically keep our heads above water defensively and try to do it with smoke and mirrors and help defense, etc. I'm not going to demand that you one-on-one defense, etc. And then we're just going to try to outscore teams by taking more shots than they do, taking more 3-pointers than they do. Pushing the ball in transition at every opportunity. He would have blossomed, and obviously not been playing behind a player playing at a very high level. You could certainly argue that the trajectory of Obi Toppin's career is completely different. The trajectory is just off the charts, whereas he just hasn't not got an opportunity. So I think those two things, in combination, prevented us from ever seeing what Obi could have brought to the table. And quite frankly, as we've talked about time and time again, I don't foresee that changing, which is why I think they should have, explored all opportunities to trade Obi, prior to the deadline. And I think they'll do so again prior to this offseason. But to your point, I agree. And I was in agreement with you that trading Randle this offseason, even though you had to sell low, was the decision I was arguing for. It turned out that was the wrong decision. Credit to Leon Rose, because even if they trade Julius Randle now, this offseason, which is something I still think they should, because of a team with Julius Randle, if you're relying on him as your primary offensive scorer or co-scorer alongside Brunson, I'm not sure how high that ceiling is. But that being said, you could certainly get a lot more value in return from Julius Randle 2 months from now than you could have 6 months ago. Credit the front office for kind of staying the course. And, I think us and a lot of other fans were angry that they didn't do it. It turns out that was the correct decision at the time.
Yeah, Obi's been a high character guy. I think the fans love him. He's definitely a fan favorite. I just out of sentimental value, almost purely, I didn't want him traded. I'm happy he's still on the Knicks, but it is unfortunate that we haven't gotten to see Obi reach the ceiling. I think that a lot of people thought he could have reached here in New York. 2 more questions before we get out of here. So next one here, MD Borden via Twitter. What star could you see effectively playing with Randle and Brunson? It could be anyone you want to choose. I like this question because, and I'm going to try to keep it reasonable. I don't want to say Nikola Jokic because he's not going to come to the Knicks. But I like this question because I think that if we're thinking about team building, I think that the Knicks will, I would be very curious what they could do if they put Randle as the center of a deal and traded him. But I think that they would try to put some of these young guys at the center of a deal and a pair, or I guess you want to be pair. Would it be put it in a trio? I guess I don't know what the word is, but you try to put them with the pair of Randle and Brunson and create a big 3. So you got to find a guy who matches, I think, their skill sets, and both of those guys have kind of been isolation kind of scorers. Randle has been able to do a little bit more besides isolation because Brunson has come in and played so well. I think they tried to get Donovan Mitchell this offseason. I'm not even sure if that was honestly the best fit for how these guys play. Like, I don't know if this guy exists in the NBA, but I feel like someone who plays kind of like Klay Thompson in his prime would be like the perfect fit for these guys. Like somebody who could just absolutely snipe, who can catch and shoot, who can play off the ball. Like if they could, and there really isn't a player that I could think of right now that's like that, and that's kind of unfortunate. So I feel weird. Our producer, James Jackson, Jimmy, shout out to Jimmy. He posted bring Steve Novak back, which was funny in our chat here. But like they needed somebody like that. Like I'm trying to think of names. I mean, honestly, like maybe like a Paul George type. Like he, I know he hasn't necessarily loved that role when he's been given that role in the past, but I think that he can maybe fill that kind of role. But that'd be kind of player I'd be looking for. I don't know if the guy exists, which is why I'm not sure if like Randle and Brunson plus 1 star is a great trio. Like I tried to probably trade one of those guys to make the trio work better. But yeah, someone like maybe a Paul George, I would say.
Yeah, I think I like the direction you're headed, and I think it's kind of a combination of a guy that can knock down threes and defend. So I like the Klay Thompson analogy. I love, obviously if you could get a guy like Tatum, is the ideal. Someone like Kawhi Leonard, that type of player. But I think in terms of realistic, potential opportunities, OG Anunoby was the first guy that kind of jumped to mind, probably because we discussed him previously. Again, a guy that leads the league in steals, an elite perimeter defender. Doesn't a guy that could function happily function as the third option on offense, kind of embrace that role. Mikal Bridges is another guy that I've always thought would be ideal in that respect. Obviously there's a Villanova connection there with Brunson. DeAndre Hunter, that type of player that's going to be able to contribute just as much, or if not more, as a defensive stalwart. So Grimes and this way, you keep Grimes and this third player to bring in is kind of and then you have Mitch Robb, defending the basket. And then you got these two guys kind of wreaking havoc, letting the Dobermans loose on the perimeter. Yeah. And then you have Brunson and Randle controlling basically, running the offense through those two guys. I just think that's kind of the best utilization. And I think that's also relatively reasonable. Again, would Toronto be interested in a RJ Barrett, Obi Toppin draft pick package? RJ Barrett, a Toronto native, for OG Anunoby. We know their price was sky high prior to the deadline. Might that come down to earth a little bit? So I'm just trying to think of realistic scenarios. I think OG will definitely be on the block. They have to make a decision one way or the other. Either they sign him to extension in July or they trade him, because I just don't see how they go into the last year of his contract and potentially lose him for nothing. Or even if they have to trade him next February, then the deadline, team has him for 3 months, and as a rental you're just not going to get as much. So I think those now that Mikal Bridges on the Nets, that's very unlikely. Andrew Wiggins is another guy that could potentially fulfill that role. But those are the kind of guys I think the player profile, at least, that I think would fit in alongside best. Again, assuming you keep Brunson and Randle as the bookends.
Yeah, in some ways, like I looked at it as like I took it as like an actual star, and I think those guys are a little low. But I mean, I think the fit with OG Anunoby makes sense. I think that's why the Knicks have been interested. I've been consistent. I'm not crazy about the price that I heard about for OG. I would not have paid those prices, but if that price comes down, then I absolutely think that that Knicks should talk. I understand that for sure. We got two. We got one more question here, one more question here. So this is at ShowNuffKD via Twitter. Here he posted, besides a complete end of season meltdown, can you see any real scenario where Leon would move on from Tibbs? I don't think so, but I do wonder what happens and I wouldn't consider this a meltdown, by the way, because he said end of season, so I assume that's regular season. So I do wonder what happens if the Knicks have another playoff. And let's say they get to the first round. Let's say it's a 4-5 matchup with Cleveland or 3-6 against Philly. And let's say they get swept. And we take that series, combined what we saw in the Atlanta series where Tibbs was badly outcoached by Nick Millen, guy was fired. Is there any scenario there where the team says, okay, we got something here, but we do have to move the coach because, like, clearly, like, in these scenarios, he's not going to get the team over the hump? I think the answer is no, but I think that there was essentially almost nobody calling for Tibbs' head after that Hawks series. I think everybody said, like, everybody thought he got a coach, but everybody said, hey, he had a great regular season, like, whatever. Team's not as good. We knew they were playing with a lot of one-year deal contract guys. We'll move on. I think there's a different feel that this team actually has real talent. So if they just flop in the playoffs, and again, I'm not necessarily saying they have to win a series, But they get beaten 5 easy or get swept, I think that there will be a fever pitch to say, hey, Tibbs, thanks for what you did. You guys back to relevancy, but there will be fans who want him out. And look, this front office hasn't seemed to care about that kind of thing, but James Dolan usually does. So I'll be curious to see if that scenario happens, what happens. I'd say no, but I think that's the one scenario where I think it could get interesting.
I don't foresee any scenario even in that particular scenario. I'll say this: there will be fans that want him fired if he takes the Knicks to the finals and lose the finals.
Oh.
There's just folks, just folks that are anti-Tibbs, and for whatever reason they just don't feel that he's the right fit. And there's some logical arguments to be made there that other coaches, a different voice. Obviously the player development, giving Obi, that running the players into the ground. And if the Knicks flamed out in the playoffs, that would also lend credence to the fact that they were overworked in the regular season.
Exactly.
He's unwilling to adjust, and there's game management and rest management, etc. But all that being said, if the Knicks to that, want to finish 5 or 6, which means they qualify for the playoffs, Tibbs would be the first coach since Van Gundy to coach the Knicks to the playoffs 2 out of 3 years. He'd be 5th, assuming I think he's 10 games behind D'Antoni right now, for 6th all time in franchise victories. I can't imagine. He has 2 years left on his contract. I just can't imagine the Knicks and the close relationship we know with Leon Rose, the Knicks getting rid of him in that scenario. If the Knicks don't get one of those top 6 seeds, and also they'd be heavy underdogs if they were playing the Cavs. Not I shouldn't say heavy underdogs. The Cavs would definitely be favored in that series. The Sixers or the Bucks or the Celtics or whatever would be heavy favorites.
Yes.
Should they match up? I think obviously we've talked about it. The Bucks and the Celtics are a tier above the Sixers, but. If the only way I think it could even be in the conversation is if the Knicks finish 7th or 8th and then lose those 2 games in a row and don't make the playoffs. In other words, only qualify for the play-in tournament. That I could see if he gets out coached badly and the team doesn't show up. That I could possibly see where it at least enters the conversation. But I think at this point, barring a meltdown like that, which would at this point would definitely be considered a disappointing season based on where they are. If they don't qualify for the playoffs, not just the play-in tournament, they don't qualify for the playoffs. Even if they get in as the 8th seed and then get beat up by the Bucks or the Celtics, I still think they would have exceeded expectations, certainly prior to the start of the season. But I guess that would enter the conversation. But long story short, I think Tibbs has done enough at this point to at least get himself 1 more year.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that it's highly unlikely that Tibbs is not the coach next year.
The other thing just to note, it is important too, is it's clear the direction of the franchise wants to compete. They're not,
Right.
If they were going to trade Randle and Brunson and bring in, John, whatever, they're going to, a whole bunch of draft pick for the Thompson twins, or somehow get Scoot Henderson, or something crazy like that. Then certainly, if you enter a rebuilding situation, but assuming the Knicks, which every indication is that they continue to stay on this path where they're trending in the right direction, being competitive, eventually which places them in position should Karl Anthony Towns or Devin Booker, whoever, get angry at his next stop. They're a star away. Then Tibbs is a guy you want, for that kind of for that approach towards the team.
Totally agree there. So this has been fun. This Knicks mailbag. And again, we will be doing more of these down the stretch, or maybe not down the stretch, but definitely as we continue to do this podcast. So thank you everybody for submitted. Again, we'll have more opportunities to get questions from you guys. We'll be doing other specialty episodes as we continue this podcast on your Blue Bloods. So thank you guys so much for listening and checking this out. Tommy, let people know they can find you.
At Tommy Beer on Twitter.
You can find me, EJ_Stewart on Twitter, Action EJ on Instagram and TikTok. That will do it for now. Thank you guys so much for listening to Orange and Blue Bloods, a Knicks podcast, an Odyssey WFN original, a podcast you can get wherever you get your podcasts, including the free Odyssey app. Remember to hit the auto download feature so you can get these episodes whenever we drop. Also, remember to check us out on YouTube. We're on YouTube, Odyssey Sports Channel, where you can find not just our full episodes of the podcast, but segments of the show. So hit us up on YouTube, hit us up on Twitter, hit us up, listen to the podcast on all your downloaded streamable services. And that's going to do it for now. So thank you guys again for checking us out. For Tommy, I'm EJ. Take it easy, guys. Peace.